Assalamu alaikum. Hello everyone. Here we are again in the third part of these videos for learning Arabic. These are videos meant for those who simply want to learn Arabic to read the Qur'an or for other reasons, or for those who would like to enroll in the Institut Imtiyaz courses, the Quranic Arabic courses. Let me remind you that the materials come from my method of Quranic Arabic, a method of Arabic based on the Qur'an, and that the PowerPoint and some of the materials can be downloaded from the website. So we had stopped at the letter Kaf, and we still needed to look at the letter Kaf. This letter Kaf has no particular difficulty in terms of pronunciation. It's like a K'd in French. As for its writing, you can see that it changes its form a little at the end, because it takes this shape of an L with a small s. So that's the letter Kaf. Next, the letter Lam. It's the easiest in the Arabic language, because it has the shape of an L but the other way round. At the end of a word it's simply a little more rounded. That's the Lam. Next we have the MIM. Now be careful with the MIM, because depending on the style of writing you can have a more or less rounded form. Personally, I write the MIM like this, I make a circle, then I bring it down like this, and here I make a circle. That's what you'll find in Qfix script, for example. But you can also use this form that you have here. So if you take the writing worksheet you'll find on the website, you'll get the standard writing, let's say, the one taught in schools, and you'll write it like this. After that it's up to you to develop your own handwriting, of course. Next we have the letter Nun, which has this round shape with a dot above it, and which loses its roundness when it's joined. So, it has this form that we have here. And that brings us to the next letter, which is harder in terms of writing, so we'll pause for a moment on it. When it's on its own, it's written with a shape a bit like a teardrop, like this, or a circle, as you can see here. When it's at the beginning, here, I've done a close-up, you can see, so you follow the arrow, we go down here, we come back here like a loop, and then we set off forwards. There you go. And in the middle of a word, here we arrive on the line. We go up, going backwards, and we make a complete arc to come back towards here. Or else, because there are two ways of doing it. You can also do it by going downwards. There you go, there are two schools of thought. And if you do it this way you get exactly the shape of an F in French, but written the other way round. So you really need to practice writing this letter, because too often you see people making an H instead. It's not an H. There you go. And at the end it has this form that we have here. Here again it's the same. Either you just make a circle like this, or you make a little upstroke first, before making this final form. There you go, so that's for the letter Ha. And let me remind you that this is the second H, and that it's a voiced H, unlike the Ha, which was a voiceless H. That is to say, in the voiceless H the vocal cords don't vibrate, whereas in the voiced H the vocal cords do vibrate. And if we do it like this, the voiceless Ha you don't hear, and the voiced Ha you have to hear, because it vibrates inside. That brings us to the two final letters, which are special, because these two letters are what we call semiconsonants, or semivowels. It's the WA and the YA. The WA here is one of the letters that don't join, so it's the last of that group. We've seen them, it's Alif, Dal, Ra, and then WA. So it joins to the letter before it but not to the one after, and it has this shape of a 9 that we have here. Now, to explain to you what a semiconsonant, a semivowel, is, I'll take the example of the YA, because the YA is like the while in French. If I say a Y to you, you see that the YA, the Y, has the function of an I. On the other hand, if I say the word yak to you, it is pronounced Y. Well, it's exactly the same in Arabic. The YA can have one function, it can be pronounced I, and we'll see when, and it can be pronounced as a consonant when we put vowels on it. For example, if I put an A here on this letter, it gives, let me switch to Arabic, it gives YA. If I put an I, it gives YE, and if I put A, U, it gives U. There you go. So in this case it has the function of a consonant, like all consonants. And it's the same for the war. If I put an 8 on it here, it gives WA. If I manage to write it, there you go. WI, and woo like this. There you go, woo. So it has the function of a consonant, but we'll also see that they have the function of a vowel. So I'll go back to the document to explain this to you. So now we've finished with the alphabet. We'll still have some spelling marks to look at, but we've finished with the alphabet. So I'll remove this document and come back to our document, which corresponds to what you'll find in the method. There you go. So this is exactly where our semiconsonants and semivowels come in. We said that the war and the YA are semiconsonants or semivowels. It turns out that when they come after the related letter, they lengthen it. For example, if I have the syllable BU here, you see that we have a U above the B. If I add the war, which in fact has the shape of the U, well, that gives us the sound BU. It makes a long vowel. It makes BU. And if I add the YA after the I, it will make the sound BI. In other words, the YA lengthens the I, the war lengthens the U, and we have one last vowel left, of course, the lay, which is lengthened by the alif. So here we find the second function of the alif. It's a long A. So, just as we had three vowels, we have three long vowels. BA, BU, BI. There you go. Now the question that arises is, if I ever have the sound A, like this for example, and I want to lengthen it. Because, you'll remember, we saw that if you make an A on its own, or a vowel on its own, you put the alif, you put the hamza above it, and the vowel, and that makes a vowel on its own. Now I have an A, and I want to lengthen it, so in theory I should put an alif. And I end up with two alifs. And it turns out that in Arabic you can never have two alifs, just as you can't have two alphas in a wolf pack. And so we'll write a single alif, and we'll top it with this little mark that we call the madda, which means precisely lengthening. There you go, so that's a mark you need to know, the madda, which I've written here underneath. And in that case we speak of alif mamduda, the alif topped with the madda. Now, some examples of words to read. The first is the word na, light. The second, na, fire. And you can see that these two words are related, since indeed, some say that the role of hell is to lead back to the light, the na must lead back to the na. Here, we have the word ri, with a long I, the wind, and the word ru, which means the spirit. The spirit, of course, is the divine breath. So you can see that here too we have the same family, the same origin. Now, why is it symbolized by a little angel? Because often in the Muslim tradition the Holy Spirit is associated with the angel Gabriel. So here, it's the same, with a miftah. Now, I'm exaggerating the lengths on purpose so that you pay attention. Fil, the elephant, like the name of the Surah al-Fil. Here we lengthen the U, misbah, with a long A mizan, with two long vowels,
Mizan, avec
mind the
deux
long
voyelles
I
de
and the
prononciation, le i long et le a long. Mizan.
A.
Et enfin, zaytoun.
And there we are.
Voilà.
So those
Ça,
are
c'est
examples of
l'exemple
words to
de mots à
read.
lire. Ici, vous
Here
avez
you
un
have an
exercice,
exercise where words need to be
de mots à
rewritten, or
réécrire,
rather,
enfin, plutôt
completed
à
with a letter.
compléter,
Here,
avec
with
la
a
lettre.
jim at the
Ici, par
beginning
exemple,
it
le
gives
jim
Jamal, in the
au
middle it
début, ça donne Jamal. Au milieu, ça donne
gives
Najm.
Najm, a star, and with a
Et
BA at the
Bahij,
end.
enfin, resplendissant.
Resplendent.
Voilà, ça permet
This lets us recap how the letters are written, because remember the jim is written like the ha and the ka, so if you can write the jim, you can write the other two. The sin is like the shin, so if you can write it at the beginning, in the middle and at the end, you've got it. For example here, sin. I can't put the vowel back afterwards, but never mind, we'll put it like this. Lisan, the tongue.
Lisan. Nafs.
Nafs. Then the dad. With the dad it's the same. If you can write one of the emphatic letters you can write them all, except that the first two. Have a final loop, mind that. So gadab, anger, married, sick. There I've slipped in among the vowels, but you've clearly understood the principle. Grapes. So that's the dad in all its forms, in any case here beginning, middle and end, and then in isolation. In any case it's there, so there's no problem, we have all the forms. Now I'll try to write this here. There. Shams. The calf. Kalb, a dog, Ishakal, the shape, and Malik, the king. The MIM here, we have Rahman, these are all Quranic words, and Salim. Na, the river, the nun in all its forms. Ghanem, and Amin, the ha in all its forms. Now mind, the ha isn't easy, so beginning, middle, and at the end. At the end I've put two of them. And finally the YA in all its forms, so that gives used, salmon, and nabil. There. You can redo that calmly, rewriting the words joined up, same as always, it's the exercise every time. Mind the alif, which doesn't join. Gaffer. This time I'm not putting the vowels in for you, they're there. Be careful not to confuse it with bar with a ha above, without an alif, which means the river. Here it's the I'm not putting the vowels. Mizan, a scale. Shab.
Mansour. Naïm.
And.
Et enfin, Ghadban.
There. So that's the writing exercises. Now that we've seen all the letters, we still have a few little subtleties to do with writing. The first we've actually already seen, it's the merging of the two alifs. We said two alifs cannot coexist, so we put the madda. For example, we could add the example of Adam. Adam, Adam, Adam. We lengthen it at the beginning, just as on. The second is the merging of the lam and the alif. Here again, in principle we should have the lam. Here and the alif. I'm cheating because I can add little strokes like this. We ought to have the lam followed by the alif.
Sauf
Except
que
that's not how it
c'est pas comme
works.
ça que ça va se passer.
When you have a lam
Lorsqu'on
followed
a
by an
un
alif,
lam qui
they
suit
merge,
d'un alif
and
et
depending
est
on the
fusionné.
script and their
Et selon les graphies et selon leur place,
position, they'll be
soit
written
comme
either
ça,
like this or like
soit
this.
comme ça. Or,
Generally, when they're
généralement, quand
detached,
ils
they'll be written like
sont
this
détachés,
and
ils vont s'écrire
otherwise.
comme ça. Et sinon,
If
s'ils
they're
sont
joined
attachés
like
comme
this.
ça. C'est les exemples qu'on
These
voit
are the
en dessous.
examples we
La,
have
la
below,
négation,
la, the
et
negation, and
salam,
salam,
la
peace.
paix.
There
Là,
you
on
see
voit
it in the
qu'il y a
middle of a
deux
word,
mots
written like
qui s'écrivent comme ça.
this.
Alors, il y a toute
Now
une
there's a whole
histoire
story
sur cette
about this
fusion,
merging of the
de
lam
lam
and the
et
alif,
d'alif.
you see, in
Alors,
Muslim mysticism.
voilà. Dans la mystique musulmane, ça
It also
symbolise
symbolizes
aussi
the effacement of the
l'effacement de
ego in
l'ego,
favor of the divine, and so there's a whole symbolism that
du divin.
turns.
Et donc, c'est toute une symbolique qui tourne
Around
autour de
this merging, this union of the two letters.
union
But
des
that's
deux
not
lettres.
our subject.
Mais c'est pas notre propos.
If it happens to interest
Si
certain
jamais ça intéresse certaines personnes,
people, they can always
ils
contact
pourront
me.
toujours me contacter ou-
There we are.
Voilà. Donc, alors,
So
ici,
here, the ta marbuta.
la ta marbuta,
The ta marbuta is a spelling
la ta
sign that we
marbuta,
find
c'est
only
un
at the
signe
end of
orthographique
words.
qu'on va trouver uniquement à la fin des mots.
Now this ta marbuta
Alors,
has a
cette
story,
ta
and if
marbuta,
you
elle a
don't
une
know that
histoire.
story, you're a bit
Si on
puzzled by
connaît pas
this
cette
letter and
histoire,
you
on n'a
wonder
pas
why
envie
it's
d'être
written
pour
like
cette
this.
lettre, on se dit mais pourquoi elle s'écrit comme ça? C'est
What's
quoi
the problem?
le
Well,
problème?
let me
Alors, je vais vous
explain.
expliquer en fait.
In fact, this
Cette ta
ta
marbuta,
marbuta
c'est une
is a
sorte
kind of hybrid
d'hybridation
between
en fait entre
two
deux lettres.
letters.
Pourquoi?
Why?
Parce que à la
Because
fin
at the
des
end of
mots,
words, at the end
à
of
la fin des
sentences
phrases,
rather, in
pardon,
Arabic we
en
don't
arabe, on
pronounce
ne
the
prononce pas les voyelles.
vowels, and when a
Et
word
quand
ends in a ta
un mot
marbuta, originally
se
this
termine par
ta
une ta
marbuta was
marbuta,
pronounced
à l'origine, on prononçait cette ta marbuta
like
comme
a.
un A.
In other words, this word
Autrement dit,
Jamila, we didn't say
Jamila,
Jamia,
on
we
ne
said
disait pas
Jamia.
Jamila, on disait Jamila. On
We pronounced this
prononçait
letter like a ha.
cette
But when
lettre
this
comme
same
un A.
word is in the middle of a
Mais quand ce même mot est au milieu d'une phrase, on
sentence,
va
we pronounce the
prononcer la
inflection, that is the
déclinaison,
vowel, and in that case
donc les
this letter
voyelles,
is
et
pronounced
dans ce
T.
cas-là, cette lettre
So,
va se prononcer T. Donc là, par
there, for
exemple, je
example,
dirais
I'd say
Jamila-in.
Jamie. T, so sometimes it's
Donc,
pronounced T
tantôt
and
elle se
sometimes
prononce
it's
T, tantôt elle se prononce A.
pronounced ha.
Et du coup,
And so,
quand
when
les
people
gens
try to
ont
fix the
essayé de
Arabic language,
fixer la
they
langue
must have
arabe,
asked themselves,
ils ont
what
dû
are we
se
going
poser
to
la
do with
question,
this
comment
letter
on
that
va
has
faire
two
avec cette lettre qui
pronunciations?
a deux
And
prononciations? Et sans
no
doute
doubt
que
someone had a
quelqu'un
brilliant idea and said,
a eu
well,
une
let's
brillante
just
idée,
write
il
it
s'est
like a
dit,
ha
eh
and
ben, on
add
n'a qu'à
two dots
l'écrire comme
above,
un
like
A
the
et rajouter deux points au-dessus comme le
ta
tout
on
comme le
top,
top,
remember.
rappelez-vous.
And
Et
so
du
that
coup,
gives us a
ça
letter that is
permet
both not
d'avoir
quite
une
a ha
lettre
and
qui
not
est à la
quite
fois, qui est pas tout à fait un A et pas tout à fait
a
un T,
ta, or rather both at
plutôt les deux à
once.
la fois.
And that's how
Et
the
voilà
ta
comment est
marbuta
née
was
la
born.
tamarbuta. Donc
So
c'est à
it's
la
both a
fois
ha
un
when you
A
don't.
quand on ne
When you
prononce pas
don't
la
pronounce the
voyelle finale,
final vowel,
donc
typically
si
at
tu
the end
prends
of a
à la fin
sentence.
des
This is true in the
phrases,
Qur'an
c'est
when you
vrai dans le
recite the
Coran,
Qur'an.
quand on récite le Coran, à la fin
You
des
don't pronounce
phrases,
the
on ne
final
prononce pas
vowels
les
at the end
voyelles
of the
finales.
sentences.
Donc
So
voilà,
that's the story of the ta
voilà l'histoire de
marbuta.
la tamarbuta. Ensuite,
Next we have
on
another
a
letter
une
called the
autre
alif
lettre qui
maksura.
s'appelle le alif maqsoura. Alors
Here
là
again it's a
encore,
matter
c'est
of
une histoire
hybridization,
d'hybridation,
or rather of
ou plutôt de
transformation, because the
transformation.
alif
Car en
maksura
fait,
is in
la
fact a
alif
ya that has
maqsoura,
been
c'est
transformed
un ya qui s'est transformé
into
en alif.
an alif.
C'est-à-dire
That
qu'il
is,
se
it's pronounced
prononce
like an
comme un
alif.
alif. On verra qu'en
We'll see
arabe,
that
il y
in
a
Arabic there are
beaucoup
many
de
transformations, and it's
transformations,
always
et c'est toujours
the
les
ya,
ya,
the
les
wa, and the
wa et
alif
les
that are
alifs qui
involved.
sont impliqués.
Involved.
Parfois,
Sometimes the ya
le ya
transforms
se
into an
transforme
alif,
en
which
alif,
will then be
c'est-à-dire qu'il va
pronounced
se
as one.
prononcer.
It's a root
C'est une racine qui,
that, when used in a
utilisée
particular
dans un
word,
mot
will
particulier, va
transform,
se
and so its
transformer, et donc
pronunciation will
sa
change.
prononciation va changer.
And so when a
Et donc,
ya
quand un
transforms
ya
into
se
an alif,
transforme en alif, on va
we'll write it
l'écrire
like
comme
this,
ça,
that
c'est-à-dire
is,
qu'on va
we'll
écrire
write
comme
it
un
like a
ya, mais sans
ya but
point.
without the dot,
Et
and
c'est
this
ce
is
qu'on
what we
appelle
call
le
the
alif
alif.
maqsoura.
Maksura.
Donc, il se
So it's
prononce
pronounced
tout à fait
exactly
comme un
like an
alif,
alif,
c'est-à-dire
that
c'est un
is, it's a
alif.
long
Là, on
vowel,
va dire
let's say
ala.
aa, but we don't write it
Mais
like
on
an
ne l'écrit
alif.
pas comme un alif. Si
If
c'était
it
un
were
alif,
an
on
alif,
l'écrirait
we'd
comme
write it
ça,
like this,
hein,
of
évidemment.
course.
Là,
The alif
alif
maksura
maqsoura.
allows us to
Ça permet de rappeler
remind
la
ourselves that the
racine
root is a ya.
ya, tout simplement.
That's all.
Voilà.
Right, we've finished with the
On en
spelling
a fini
signs and
avec
with the
les
alphabet.
signes orthographiques,
But before
avec
finishing,
l'alphabet.
I wanted to
Mais avant de terminer, je voulais
stop
m'arrêter
on
sur la
phonetics to point
phonétique
out to
pour
you
vous indiquer
the importance
l'importance
of the long
des
vowels,
voyelles longues.
because you see, the
Car
long
voyez, les
vowels are
voyelles
not
longues ne sont
gadgets
pas
in
des
Arabic.
gadgets en arabe.
They really have a full and complete function in grammar and in the morphology of words. For example, here you have the word Malik, the king, and if I add an alif here it gives me Malik, which means the possessor. And indeed, in the Fatiha, depending on the reading, you can read Maliki Yomi Didin or Maliki Yomi Didin with a whole body of literature about which of the two is best. But that's another debate. The fact remains that if I say Malik, it's not the same meaning as if I say Malik. So this alif has a real function. Likewise here, if I have the word Qadim, it means next, whereas the word Qadim means old. We almost have opposites. So here we clearly see the importance of pronouncing the long vowel correctly, of stressing it. And as I was saying in the previous video, where you have long vowels is also where you have the tonic stress. And when people speak fast, it's the tonic stress that you'll hear, more than the long vowel itself. Likewise here, if I have the word Jamal, the camel, and Jamal, beauty, it's not quite the same. This one is short and this one is long. Rahim is the womb, and Rahim, merciful, even though these two words share the same root, which means that mercy is something very feminine in the Arabic language. And so Rahim is nevertheless not quite like Rahim. So you have to lengthen the ayn properly. Alam, the landmark, and Alam, the world. Sabaka, to go ahead, and Sabaka, to race. Now what you need to know is that this verb here is in fact a derivative of that one, which clearly shows that the long vowels have a function, a grammatical function, that is, here, by adding this alif, we change the meaning of the verb. Sabaka means to go ahead. Sabaka means to make an effort to go ahead. And what's interesting is that in this lengthening of the language, we have, phonetically, this tension, since it's sabaka, this effort towards something. And so, sabaka, to go ahead, and sabaka, to make an effort to go ahead, that is, to race, to try to get ahead of someone. So, the long vowels are not gadgets. One last example here, Adana, to fall into debt, and Danana, to draw near. And we could multiply the examples endlessly, because there are an enormous number of them. Here, a little sentence to put it into practice. If I say to you a hakim, hakim, 1, 2, 3, 4, you can see the rhythm. A wise governor. Hakim, hakim, 1, 2, 3, 4, you hear the rhythm. Hakim, hakim. So it's all a matter of rhythm, and this idea of rhythm is far more important than one might think at first glance. Because in the Qur'an, you know that of course the meaning is paramount, but how shall I put it? The form also matters, especially in the Meccan surahs, where you have rhymes at the ends, assonances, and a particular rhythm. And very often you have surahs, or rather verses, that end with two adjectives, such as for example, here. So you really do hear that there's a particular rhythm here, in this alternation of short and long. And so rhythm, in the Arabic language, is extremely important. So, in addition to the fact that these long vowels have an important grammatical function, they have, at the same time, an aesthetic function, which mustn't be neglected either. And we'll see, indeed, if you follow the courses, that certain phenomena in the Qur'an can only be explained by aesthetics, a certain choice.
certains choix
In the
dans
arrangement of the
l'agencement des
sentences,
phrases,
certain things,
certaines
or
fautes
certain
ou
seeming
certains
redundancies,
doubles
why,
emplois,
here, we
pourquoi
use this
ici
in
on va
this
utiliser
place
telle
and that in
chose,
another
à quel
place,
endroit telle autre
wheel.
chose. On
See
verra
that
que ça
sometimes it can
s'explique
only be
parfois
explained by
que par
aesthetics.
l'esthétique.
So it's
Donc,
very
très
important to pay
important
attention to
de
these
faire
long vowels right
attention
from the
pas
start.
oublier à ces voyelles
Why do I
longues.
say this?
Pourquoi je dis ça? Parce
Because
que
very
très
often
souvent,
students
les élèves se
tell
disent, bon,
themselves,
c'est pas très
well,
grave
it's
si
not
je
a big
si je
deal if I don't
prononce pas bien
pronounce
les
the long
voyelles longues.
vowels
Mais si, c'est
properly.
grave.
But it is a big
Si vous
deal,
connaissez
because
une
if you
mauvaise
pick up this bad
habitude,
habit, you'll miss
vous allez
out
passer à côté de
on
quelque chose
something
d'important.
important.
Donc
So
voilà,
there we are.
j'en ai
I've finished with
terminé
these 3
avec
videos.
ces 3
Let me
vidéos.
check
Voilà, je vérifie.
that
C'est
it's
bien
really
fini.
done.
Et donc,
And
pour ceux qui
so, for
voudraient
those who would like
aller
to
plus
go
loin,
further and learn
apprendre
Quranic
l'arabe
Arabic,
coranique,
you're most
vous êtes les
welcome.
bienvenus. Donc,
To
pour
join the courses of Institut
positionner des
Imtiyaz,
cours de
you just need to
l'Institut
send me an
Imtiyaz,
email.
il suffit de m'envoyer
You go
un
to the
mail,
website,
vous allez
you'll
sur le
find
site,
it,
vous
it's
trouvez, le site c'est
institutimtiyaz.com.
institutimtiyaz.com,
And you
et
send
vous
me an
m'envoyez un
email,
mail,
and
et
you're
vous êtes
most
les
welcome.
bienvenus. Et
And
puis,
don't
n'hésitez
hesitate
pas
to
aussi
visit
à
the site
visiter
either,
le
because on the
site,
site
car
you
sur
have
le
quite a
site, vous
few
avez pas mal
teaching
de
materials
supports
that
pédagogiques qui
are
sont
downloadable
téléchargeables
free of
gratuitement,
charge, and
Donc
also
voilà, et
articles on a
puis
number of
des articles
topics
sur
relating
un
to the
certain nombre
Qur'an,
de sujets
including, for
relativement marrants.
example,
Donc voilà, notamment par exemple
French
des
words of
mots
Arabic
arabes,
origin, or French
des
words
mots
that we
français
find in the
d'origine
Qur'an,
arabe
or
ou
the
des mots
roots that we
français
find in the
qu'on
Qur'an,
retrouve dans le Coran, ou les racines qu'on va retrouver dans le Coran, etc.
and so on,
Plein de
lots of
choses
things on
sur le
tafsir in
tafsir
particular,
notamment.
and so on.
Voilà,
There
bienvenue
we
à
are.
tous et
Welcome to all, and we hope to
on
see you
espère
again
vous
very
retrouver
soon.
très bientôt. Ma'as salama, ila liqa.